things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson with Reality Shifters and the International Mandela Effect Conference, and you're now listening to Dark Wolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
Ripon Rabbit Hole is a community-driven radio. At times the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Ripon Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light, and you're now listening to Dark Wolf's Den.
Are ghosts real?
We had 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Does time travel actually exist?
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines.
You know, sometimes I wonder about reincarnation. Don't you?
A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana.
What would happen if the world found out that aliens were real?
I didn't say disclosure would be easy, but what is the alternative?
To establish a space force as the 6th branch of the armed forces.
We have so many questions and yet so little time, so to have you here, the pleasure is all mine.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness. This is the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to another episode of the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Thursday, December 10th, 2020, and tonight we are discussing Christmas ghost stories. This is a tradition that used to be held back in Victorian England and kind of died out in the late 19th century. We're going to resurrect that tradition tonight and tell Christmas ghost stories. That's tonight, December 10th, 2020, on the Dark Wolf's Den Show. But first, today in history. And since we're telling stories tonight, I was really intrigued when I ran across this fact of the day. Check this out, guys. On this day in 1884, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain is first published in the UK and Canada. It took until February 1885 in the US due to printing errors. And that is today's Today in History. And you guys know I just absolutely love it when we have something that is related to the topic that we're doing. And a story coming out is definitely related to the stories we're telling tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us get started. Now, growing up, we sing the same Christmas songs every year over and over and over. And there was one line in one Christmas carol that I just never really did quite understand. And maybe you guys recognize the line. It says, "There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago." Scary ghost stories. That just really didn't make a lot of sense to me. Well, after looking into it, actually I've learned quite a bit. I found an article by the Smithsonian Magazine that I would like to share with you guys, at least a part of. It's called "A Plea to Resurrect the Christmas Tradition of Telling Ghost Stories." It says, for the last 100 years, Americans have kept ghosts in their place, letting them out only in October in the run-up to our real haunted holiday, Halloween. But it wasn't always this way, and it's no coincidence that the most famous ghost story is a Christmas story. Or, put another way, the most famous Christmas story is a ghost story. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol was first published in 1843, and it's a story about a man tormented by a series of ghosts the night before Christmas. Dickens' supernatural Yuletide terror was no outlier, since for much of the 19th century was the holiday indisputably associated with ghosts and specters. Quote, "Whenever 5 or 6 English-speaking people meet round a fire on Christmas Eve, they start telling each other ghost stories," end quote. Humorist Jerome K. Jerome wrote in his 1891 collection Told After Supper. Quote, "Nothing satisfies us on Christmas Eve but to hear each other tell authentic anecdotes about specters. It's a genial, festive season, and we love to muse upon graves and dead bodies and murders and blood." Well, I don't know about that in modern day, but one thing I would like to do in modern day is bring back the tradition of telling Christmas ghost stories. The story we finished yesterday's shows with, called Christmas Every Day, was by an author named William Dean Howls. In this same article, he is quoted as saying, "It was well once a year, if not oftener, to remind men by parable of the old simple truths, to teach them that forgiveness and charity and endeavor for life better and purer than each has lived are the principles upon which alone the world holds together and gets forward. It was well for the comfortable and refined to be put in mind of the savagery and suffering all around them, and to be taught, as Dickens was always teaching, that certain feelings which grace human nature, as tenderness for the sick and helpless, self-sacrifice and generosity, self-respect and manliness and womanliness, are the common heritage of the race, the direct gift of heaven, shared equally by the rich and the poor." End quote. Put simply, Christmas at the time was about telling ghost stories and reminding people of the mortality in which we all share. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're resurrecting that tradition tonight. We're telling ghost stories. I'm going to read 2 Christmas ghost stories this evening, and I do hope that you guys enjoy. So without any further ado, let's get to our first story, ladies and gentlemen. The first story is called Smee. Smee by A.M. Barrage, as narrated by Jerry the Dark Wolf Hicks. "No," said Jackson with a deprecatory smile. "I'm sorry. I don't want to upset your game. I shan't be doing that because you'll have plenty without me. But I'm not playing any games of hide and seek. It was Christmas Eve, and we were a party of 14 with just the proper leavening of youth. We had dined well. It was the season for childish games, and we were all in the mood for playing them. All, that is, except Jackson. When somebody suggested hide and seek, there was rapturous and almost unanimous approval. His was the one dissentient voice. It was not like Jackson to spoil sport or refuse to do as others wanted. Somebody asked him if he were feeling seedy. "No," he answered. "I feel perfectly fit, thanks, but," he added with a smile which softened without retracting the flat refusal, "I'm not playing hide and seek." "Why not?" someone asked. He hesitated for a moment before replying. "I sometimes go and stay at a house where a girl was killed. She was playing hide and seek in the dark. She didn't know the house very well. There was a door that led to the servants' staircase. When she was chased, she thought the door led to a bedroom. She opened the door and jumped, and landed at the bottom of the stairs. She broke her neck, of course." We all looked serious. Mrs. Fernley said, "How terrible! And you were there when it happened?" Jackson shook his head sadly. "No," he said. "But I was there when something else happened, something worse." "What could be worse than that?" "This was," said Jackson. He hesitated for a moment. Then he said, "I wonder if any of you have ever played a game called Smee. It's much better than hide and seek. The name comes from It's Me, of course. Perhaps you'd like to play it instead of hide and seek. Let me tell you the rules of the game. Every player is given a sheet of paper. All the sheets except one are blank. On the last sheet of paper is written Smee. Nobody knows who Smee is except Smee himself or herself. You turn out the lights, and Smee goes quietly out of the room and hides. After a time, the others go off and search for Smee, but of course they don't know who they're looking for. When one player meets another, he challenges him by saying Smee. The other player answers Smee, and they continue searching. But the real Smee doesn't answer when someone challenges. The second player stays quietly beside him. Presently they will be discovered by a third player. He will challenge and receive no answer, and he will join the first two. This goes on until all the players are in the same place. The last one to find Smee has to pay a forfeit. It's a good, noisy, amusing game. In a big house, it often takes a long time for everyone to find Smee. Perhaps you'd like to try. I'll happily pay my forfeit and sit here by the fire while you play." "It sounds a good game," I remarked. "Have you played it too, Jackson?" "Yes," he answered. "I played it in the house that I was telling you about." "And she was there, the girl who broke—" No, said someone else. "He told us he wasn't there when she broke her neck." Jackson thought for a moment. "I don't know if she was there or not. I'm afraid she was. I know that there were 13 of us playing the game, and there were only 12 people in the house, and I didn't know the dead girl's name. When I heard that whispered name in the dark, it didn't worry me. But I tell you, I'm never going to play that kind of game again. It made me quite nervous for a long time. I preferred to pay my forfeit at once. We all stared at him. His words did not make sense at all. Tim Vooch was the kindest man in the world. He smiled at us all. "This sounds like an interesting story," he said. "Come on, Jackson. You can tell it to us instead of paying a forfeit." "Very well," said Jackson, "and here is the story. Have you met the Sangstons? They're cousins of mine, and they live in Surrey. 5 years ago, they invited me to go and spend Christmas with them. It was an old house with lots of unnecessary passages and staircases. A stranger could get lost in it quite easily. Well, I went down for that Christmas. Violet Sangston promised me that I knew most of the other guests. Unfortunately, I could not get away from my job until Christmas Eve. All the other guests had arrived there the previous day. I was the last to arrive, and I was only just in time for dinner. I said hello to everyone I knew, and Violet Sangston introduced me to people that I didn't know. Then it was time to go into dinner. That is perhaps why I didn't hear the name of a tall, dark-haired, handsome girl whom I hadn't met before. Everyone was in a rather hurry, and I'm always bad at catching people's names. She looked cold and clever. She didn't look at all friendly, but she looked interesting, and I wondered who she was. I didn't ask because I was sure that someone would speak to her by name during the meal. Unluckily, however, I was a long way from her table. I was sitting next to Mrs. Gorman, and as usual, Mrs. Gorman was being very bright and amusing. Her conversation is always worth listening to, and I completely forgot to ask the name of the dark, proud girl. There were 12 of us, including the Sangstons themselves. We were all young, or trying to be young. Jack and Violet Sangston were the oldest, and their 17-year-old son Reggie was the youngest. It was Reggie who suggested Smee when the talk turned to games. He told us the rules of the game, just as I've described them to you. Jack Sangston warned us all. "If you're going to play games in the dark," he said, "please be careful of the back stairs on the first floor. A door leads to them, and I've often thought about taking the door off. In the dark, a stranger to the house could think they were walking into a room. A girl really did break her neck on those stairs." I asked how it happened. "It was about 10 years ago, before we came here. There was a party and they were playing hide and seek. The girl was looking for somewhere to hide. She heard somebody coming and ran along the passageway to get away. She opened the door, thinking it led to a bedroom. She planned to hide in there until the seeker had gone. Unfortunately, it was the door that led to the back stairs. She fell straight down to the bottom of the stairs. She was dead when they picked her up. We all promised to be careful. Mrs. Gorman even made a little joke about living to be 90. You see, none of us had known the poor girl, and we did not want to feel sad on Christmas Eve. Well, we all started the game immediately after dinner. Young Reggie Sangston went round making sure all the lights were off except the one in the servants' room and in the sitting room where we were. We then prepared 12 sheets of paper. 11 of them were blank, and one of them had Smee written on it. Reggie mixed them all up, then we each took one. The person who got the paper with Smee on it had to hide. I looked at mine and saw that it was blank. A moment later, all the electric lights went out. In the darkness, I heard someone moving very quietly to the door. After a minute, somebody blew a whistle, and we all rushed to the door. I had no idea who was Smee. For 5 or 10 minutes, we were all rushing up and down passages and in and out of rooms, challenging each other and answering, "Smee? Smee!" After a while, the noise died down, and I guessed that someone had found Smee. After a time, I found a group of people all sitting on some narrow stairs. I challenged and received no answer, so Smee was there. I hurriedly joined the group. Presently, 2 more players arrived. Each one was hurrying to avoid being last. Jack Sangston was last and was given a forfeit. "I think we're all here now, aren't we?" he remarked. He lit a match, looked up the staircase, and began to count. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, he said, and then laughed. "That's silly. There's one too many." The match went out, and he lit another and began to count. He got as far as 12, then he looked puzzled. "There are 13 people here," he said. "I haven't counted myself yet." "Oh, nonsense," I laughed. "You probably began with yourself, and now you want to count yourself twice." His son took out his electric torch. It gave a better light than the matches, and we all began to count. Of course, there were 12 of us. Jack laughed. "Well," he said, "I was sure I counted 13 twice." From halfway up the stairs, Violet Sangston spoke nervously. "I thought there was somebody sitting 2 steps above me. Have you moved, Captain Ransom?" The captain said that he hadn't, but I thought there was somebody sitting between Mrs. Sangston and me. Just for a moment there was an uncomfortable something in the air. A cold finger seemed to touch us all. For that moment we all felt that something odd and unpleasant had just happened, and was likely to happen again. Then we laughed at ourselves and at each other, and we felt normal again. There were only 12 of us, and that was that. Still laughing, we marched back down to the sitting room to begin again. This time I was Smee. Violet Sangston found me while I was searching for a hiding place. That game didn't last long at all. Soon there were 12 people, and the game was over. Violet was cold and wanted her jacket. Her husband went up to their bedroom to fetch it. As soon as he'd gone, Reggie touched me on the arm. He was looking pale and sick. "Quick," he whispered. "I've got to talk to you. Something horrible has happened." We went into the breakfast room. "What's the matter?" I asked. "I don't know. You were Smee last time, weren't you?" Well, of course I didn't know who Smee was. While Mother and the others ran to the west side of the house and found you, I went east. There's a deep clothes cupboard in my bedroom. It looked like a good hiding place. I thought that perhaps Smee might be there. I opened the door in the dark and touched somebody's hand. "Smee," I whispered. There was no answer. I thought I'd found Smee. Well, I don't understand it, but I suddenly had a strange cold feeling. I can't describe it, but I felt that something was wrong. So I turned on my electric torch, and there was nobody there. Now I am sure I touched a hand, and nobody could get out of the cupboard because I was standing in the doorway. What do you think? "You imagined you touched a hand," I said. He gave a short laugh. "I knew you would say that," he said. "Of course I imagined it. That's the only explanation, isn't it?" I agreed with him. I could see that he still felt shaken. Together we returned to the sitting room for another game of Smee. The others were all ready and waiting to start again. Perhaps it was my imagination, although I'm almost sure that it was not. But I had a feeling that nobody was really enjoying the game anymore. But everybody was too polite to mention it. All the same, I had the feeling that something was wrong. All the fun had gone out of the game. Something deep inside me was trying to warn me. "Take care," it whispered. "Take care." There was some unnatural, unhealthy influence at work in the house. Why did I have this feeling? Because Jack Sangston had counted 13 people instead of 12? Because his son imagined he had touched someone's hand in an empty cupboard? I tried to laugh at myself, but I did not succeed. Well, we started again. While we were all chasing the unknown Smee, we were all as noisy as ever, but it seemed to me that most of us were just acting. We were no longer enjoying the game. At first I stayed with the others, but for several minutes no Smee was found. I left the main group and started searching on the first floor in the west side of the house. And there, while I was feeling my way along, I bumped into a pair of human knees. I put out my hand and touched a soft, heavy curtain. Then I knew where I was. There were tall, deep windows with window seats at the end of the passage. The curtains reached to the ground. Somebody was sitting in a corner of one of the window seats behind a curtain. Aha, I thought, I've caught Smee. So I pulled the curtain to one side and touched a woman's arm. It was a dark, moonless night outside. I couldn't see the woman sitting in the corner of the window seat. "Smee?" I whispered. There was no answer. When Smee is challenged, he or she does not answer. So I sat down beside her to wait for the others. Then I whispered, "What's your name?" And out of the darkness beside me came the whisper, "Brenda Ford." I did not know the name, but I guessed at once who she was. I knew every girl in the house by name except one, and that was the tall, pale, dark girl. So here she was sitting beside me on the window seat, shut in between a heavy curtain and a window. I was beginning to enjoy the game. I wondered if she was enjoying it too. I whispered one or two rather ordinary questions to her and received no answer. Smee is a game of silence. It is the rule of the game that Smee and the person or persons who have found Smee have to keep quiet. This, of course, makes it harder for the others to find them, but there was nobody else about. I wondered, therefore, why she was insisting on silence. I spoke again and got no answer. I began to feel a little annoyed. Perhaps she's one of those cold, clever girls who has a poor opinion of all men, I thought. She doesn't like me, and she's using the rules of the game as an excuse for not speaking. Well, if she doesn't like sitting here with me, I certainly don't want to sit here with her. I turned away from her. I hope someone finds us soon, I thought. As I sat there, I realized that I disliked sitting beside this girl very much indeed. That was strange. The girl I had seen at dinner had seemed likable in a cold kind of way. I noticed her and wanted to know more about her. But now I really felt uncomfortable beside her. The feeling of something wrong, something unnatural, was growing. I remembered touching her arm, and I trembled with horror. I wanted to jump up and run away. I prayed that someone else would come along soon. Just then I heard the light footsteps in the passage. Somebody on the other side of the curtain brushed against my knees. The curtain moved to one side, and a woman's hand touched my shoulder. "Smee?" whispered a voice that I recognized at once. It was Mrs. Gorman. Of course, she received no answer. She came and sat down beside me, and at once I felt very much better. "It's Tony Jackson, isn't it?" she whispered. "Yes," I whispered back. "You're not Smee, are you?" "No, she's on my other side." She reached out across me. I heard her fingernails scratch a woman's silk dress. "Hello, Smee. How are you? Who are you? Oh, it's against the rules to talk, right? Never mind. Tony will break the rules. Do you know, Tony, this game is beginning to annoy me a little. I hope they aren't going to play it all evening. I'd like to play a nice, quiet game, all together beside a warm fire." "Me too," I agreed. "Can't you suggest something to them? There's something rather unhealthy about this particular game. I'm sure I'm being very silly, but I can't get rid of the idea that we've got an extra player, somebody who ought not to be here at all." That was exactly how I felt, but I didn't say so. However, I felt very much better. Mrs. Gorman's arrival had chased away my fears. We sat talking. "I wonder when the others will find us," said Mrs. Gorman. After a time we heard the sound of feet and young Reggie's voice shouting, "Hello? Hello? Is anybody there?" "Yes," I answered. "Is Mrs. Gorman with you?" "Yes." "What happened to you? You've both got forfeits. We've all been waiting for you for hours. But you haven't found Smee yet," I complained. "You haven't, you mean. I was Smee the whole time." "But Smee is here with us," I cried. "Yes," agreed Mrs. Gorman. The curtain was pulled back, and we sat looking into the eye of Reggie's electric torch. I looked at Mrs. Gorman, then on my other side. Between me and the wall was an empty space on the window seat. I stood up at once. Then I sat down again. I was feeling very sick, and the world seemed to be going round and round. "There was somebody there," I insisted, "because I touched her." "So did I," said Mrs. Gorman in a trembling voice. "And I don't think anyone could leave this window seat without us knowing." Reggie gave a shaky little laugh. I remembered his unpleasant experience earlier that evening. "Somebody's been playing jokes," he said. "Are you coming down?" We were not very popular when we came down to the sitting room. "I found the two of them sitting behind a curtain on a window seat," said Reggie. I went up to the tall, dark girl. "So you pretended to be Smee and then went away," I accused her. She shook her head. Afterwards, we all played cards in the sitting room, and I was very glad. Some time later, Jack Sangston wanted to talk to me. I could see that he was rather cross with me, and soon he told me the reason. "Tony," he said, "I suppose you're in love with Mrs. Gorman. That's your business. But please don't make love to her in my house during a game. You kept everyone waiting. It was very rude of you, and I'm ashamed of you." "But we were not alone," I protested. "There was somebody else there, somebody who was pretending to be Smee. I believe it was that tall, dark girl, Mrs. Ford. She whispered her name to me. Of course she refused to admit it afterwards." Jack Sangston stared at me. Miss who? He breathed. Brenda Ford, she said. Jack put a hand on my shoulder. Look here, Tony, he said. I don't mind a joke, but enough is enough. We don't want to worry the ladies. Brenda Ford is the name of the girl who broke her neck on the stairs. She was playing hide and seek here 10 years ago. The end. So what do you guys think? Is that a game you'll be playing this holiday season? Will you be playing Smee? Look, guys, I like hide and seek just as much as the next guy, but I don't know about that game. That sounds just a little bit on the really, really scary side, right? But what's a good ghost story for but to put a little fear into us, especially in the dark of winter around a warm fire with nothing else to do but tell ghost stories. And we'll be back with another scary ghost story and the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den Show right after these messages. Don't you touch that dial.
We gotta stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, it's AJ, the Ripon Rabbit. Are you enjoying your Thursday night so far? I know I am. Make sure to thumb up that video, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell. You'll get our notifications every time we go live. Jerry Hicks and the Dark Wolf's Den Show kicks off the weekend right here at Ripon Common Sense Radio. I'll return with the Ripon Rabbit Hole live show tomorrow night, Friday, December 11th, with a look at mysterious booms. We're going to explore the recent surge in worldwide mysterious noises and unidentified sounds in the air. Did you just hear that boom? Boom, boom, boom. Then Saturday night, December 12th, special guest Laurel Erica will be here to discuss word magic. I'm super excited. Laurel is an English language linguist, and she is our special guest. She's going to join us and talk with you because we're going to do open lines about word magic. She really is an expert on the English language, and she has a fascinating insight into its use. So you want to join us at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, Saturday night, December 12th, for this very special episode. Then we'll end out the weekend right Sunday, December 13th, and explore ley lines. Now, ley lines are, normally straight alignments drawn between various historic structures and prominent landmarks such as effigy mounds. We're going to get into this. So this rabbit hole goes really deep. It's a lot of fun. We'll explore the possibility together that they do carry along with them rivers of supernatural energy. That's how we'll end the weekend, Sunday, December 13th. Again, all shows start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. If you haven't done so already, please make sure to hop on over to the riponrabbithole.com, get on our mail list, and we'll send you out our weekly schedule every Wednesday morning. Now, we only send it once. We do not spam. We don't share. We don't sell those email addresses. We just deliver to you weekly, Wednesday morning, the outlook of the rabbit holes ahead. You'll get it in your inbox. You'll be able to enjoy it with a cup of coffee and understand the rabbit holes of the weekend we will explore together. Speaking of exploring, back to Christmas ghost stories with your host, Jerry Hicks and the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Right here on the very best of Common Sense Radio, the Ripon Rabbit Hole.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Thursday, December 10th, 2020, and if you're just tuning in this evening, we are discussing Christmas ghost stories. Actually, we're reading Christmas ghost stories, that's right. In the first half, we heard the story of Smee, a different twisted version of the game of hide and seek. In the second half, we're going to hear about a guy who went on a trip that didn't turn out quite the way he thought it was going to turn out. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dark Christmas. We had borrowed the house from a friend none of us seemed to know. High Fallen House stood on an eminence overlooking the sea. It was a square Victorian gentleman's residence. The large bay windows looked down through the pines toward the shore. 6 stone steps led the visitor up to the front double door where a Gothic bell pull released a loud, mournful clang deep into the distance of the house. Laurel lined the drive. The stable block was disused. The walled garden had been locked up in 1914 when the gardeners went to war. Only one had returned. I had been warned that the high brick wall enclosing the garden was unsafe. As I passed it slowly in the car, I saw a faded notice falling off the paint-peeled door. "Do not enter." I was the first to arrive. My friends were following by train, and I was to collect them the next day, then we would settle down to Christmas. I had driven from Bristol, and I was tired. There was a Christmas tree roped on top of my 4x4 and a trunkload of provisions. We were not near any town, but the housekeeper had left stacked wood to build a fire, and I had brought a shepherd's pie and a bottle of Rioja for my first night. The kitchen was a cheerful enough one. I had once got the fire going and the radio playing while I unpacked our festive supplies. I checked my phone, no signal. Still, I knew the time of the train tomorrow, and it was a relief to feel that the world had gone away. I put my food in the oven to heat up, poured a glass of wine, and went upstairs to find myself a bedroom. The first landing had 3 bedrooms leading off of it. Each had a moth-eaten rug, a metal bed, and a mahogany chest of drawers. At the far end of the landing was a second set of stairs up to the attic. I am not romantic about maids' rooms or nurseries, and there was something about that second set of stairs that made me hesitate. The landing was bright in the sudden way of late sun on a winter's afternoon, yet the light ended abruptly at the foot of the stairs as though it couldn't go any farther. I didn't want to be near that set of stairs, so I chose the room at the front of the house. As I went to bring up my bag, the house bell started to ring, its jerky metallic hammers sounding somewhere in the guts of the house. I was surprised, but not alarmed. I expected the housekeeper. I opened the door. There was no one there. I went down the steps and looked around. I admit it, I was frightened. The night was clear and soundless. There was no car in the distance, no footsteps walking away. Determined to conquer my fear, I walked round a little. Then, turning back to the house, I saw it. The bell wire ran along the side of the house under a shirtling gutter. Perhaps 30 or 40 bats were dangling upside down on the vibrating wire. The same number swooped and swerved in dark masses. Obviously, their movement on the wire had set off the bell. I like bats. Clever bats. Good. Now, supper. I ate. I drank. I wondered why love is so hard and life is so short. I went to bed. The room was warmer now, and I was ready to sleep. The sound of sea ebbed in the flow of my dreams. I woke from a deep sleep in dead darkness to hear, what? What can I hear? It sounded like a ball bearing or a marble rolling on a bare floor above my head. It rolled hard on hard, then hit the wall. Then it rolled again in the other direction. This might not have mattered except the other direction was upwards. Things can come loose and roll downwards, but they cannot come loose and roll up unless someone. That thought was so unwelcome that I dismissed it along with the law of gravity. Whatever was rolling over my head must be natural dislodging. The house was draughty and unused. The attics were under the eaves where any kind of weather might get in. Weather or an animal. Remember the bats. I pulled the covers up to my eyebrows and pretended not to listen. There it was again. Hard, on hit, on pause, on roll. I waited for sleep, waited for daylight. We are lucky, even the worst of us, because daylight comes. It was a brooding day, that 21st of December, the shortest day of the year. Coffee, coat on, car keys. Shouldn't I just check the attic? The second set of stairs was narrow, a servant's staircase. It led to a lath and plaster corridor, barely a shoulder width wide. I started coughing. Breathing was difficult. Damp had dropped the plaster in thick, crumbling heaps on the floorboard. As below there were 3 doors. 2 were closed. The door to the room above my room was ajar. I made myself go forward. The room was under the eaves as I had guessed. The floor was rough, there was no bed, only a washstand and a clothes rail. What surprised me was the nativity scene in the corner. Standing about 2 feet tall, it was more like a doll's house than a Christmas decoration. Inside the open-fronted stable stood the animals, the shepherds, the crib, Joseph. Above the roof, on a bit of wire, was a battered star. It was old, handmade in a workmanlike but not craftsmanlike sort of way, the painted wood now rubbed and faded like pigments of time. I thought I would carry it downstairs and put it by our Christmas tree. It must have been made for the children when there were children here. I stuffed my pockets with the figures and animals and left quickly, leaving the door open. I had to set off for the station. Stephen and Susie could help me with the rest later. As soon as I was out of the house, my lungs felt clear again. It must be the plaster dust. The drive to the station was along the coast road, lonely and unyielding. The road turned in a series of blind bends and tight corners. I met no one, and I saw no one. Gulls circled over the sea. The station itself was a simpler shelter on a long single track. There were no information boards. I checked my phone. No signal. At last, the train appeared distantly down the track. I was excited. Memories of visiting my father as a child when he was stationed at his RAF base gave me a rush of pleasure whenever I travel by train or come to meet one. The train slowed and halted. The guard stood down for a moment. I watched the doors. It wasn't a big train, this branch line train, but none of the doors opened. I waved at the guard who come over. "I am meeting my friends." He shook his head. "Train's empty. Next stop is end of the line." I was confused. Had they got off at the earlier stop? I described them. The guard shook his head again. "I noticed strangers. They would have boarded at Carlisle, asked me where to get off. Always do." "Is there another train before tomorrow?" I asked. "One a day, and that's your lot. And more than anybody needs in a place like this. Where are you staying?" "High Fallen House. Do you know it?" "Oh, aye, we all know it." He looked as if he were about to say something else. Instead, he blew his whistle. The empty train pulled away, leaving me staring down the long track, watching the red light like a warning. I needed to get a signal on my phone. I drove on past the station, following the steep hill, hoping some height would come connect me to the rest of the world. At the top of a hill, I stopped the car and got out. Pulling up the collar of my coat, the first snow hit my face with insect insistence, sharp and spiteful like little bites. I looked across the whitening bay. That must be High Fallen House. But what's that? 2 figures walking on the beach. Is it Stephen and Susie? Had they driven here after all? Then, as I strained my eyes against the deceit of distance, I realized that the second figure was much smaller than the first. They were walking purposefully towards the house. When I arrived back, it was nearly dark. I put on the lights, blew the fire into a blaze. There was no sign of the mysterious couple I had seen from the hill. Perhaps it had been the housekeeper and her daughter, come to make sure that everything was all right. I had a telephone number for Mrs. Wormwood, but without a signal, I could not call her. The snow was thickening in windy swirls. Relax, have a whiskey. I leaned on the warm kitchen range with my whiskey in hand. The wooden figures I had brought down from the attic were lying on the kitchen table. I should go up and get the stable. I don't want to. I bounded up the first set of stairs, using energy to force out unease. At my bedroom, I put on the light. That felt better. The second set of stairs stood in shadow at the end of the long landing. I felt that constriction in my lungs again. Why am I holding onto the handrail like an old man? I could see the only light in the attic was the top of the stairs. I found the round, brown bake light switch. I flicked down the nipple. A single bulb lit up reluctantly. The room was straight ahead. The door was closed. Hadn't I left it open? I turned the handle on the door and stood in the doorway. The room dimly lit by the light from the stairs. Washstand, nativity, clothes rail. On the clothes rail was a child's dress. I hadn't noticed that before. I suppose I had been in a hurry. Pushing aside my misgivings, I went in purposefully and bent down to pick up the wooden nativity. It was heavy, and I had just gotten it secure in my arms when the light on the landing went out. Hello? Who's there? There's someone breathing like they can barely breathe. Not faint, struggling for breath. I mustn't turn around because whoever or whatever it is behind me. I stood still for a minute, steadying my nerve. Then I shuffled forward toward the edge of the light coming up from downstairs. At the doorway I heard a step behind me, lost my balance, and put out a hand to steady myself. My hand gripped something wet. The clothes rail. It must be the dress. My heart was overbeating. Don't panic. Bakelite, bad wiring, strange house, darkness, aloneness. But you're not alone, are you? Back in the kitchen with whiskey, Radio 4, and pasta boiling, I examined the dress. It was for a small child, and it was hand-knitted. The wool was smelly and sopping. I washed it out and left it hanging over the sink to drip. I guess there must be a hole in the roof, and the dress had been soaking up in the rain for a long time. I ate my supper, tried to read, told myself it had been nothing at all. It was only 8 p.m. I didn't want to go to bed, though the snow outside was like a quilt. I decided to arrange the nativity. Donkey, sheep, camels, wise men, shepherds, star, Joseph. The crib was there, but it was empty. There was no Christ child, and there was no Mary. Had I dropped them in the dark room? I hadn't heard anything fall, and these wooden figures were 6 inches tall. Joseph was wearing a woolen tunic, but his wooden legs had painted pewtees. I pulled off the tunic. Underneath, wooden Joseph wore a painted uniform. First World War. When I turned him around, I saw that there was a gash in his back like a stab wound. My phone beeped. I dropped Joseph, grabbed the phone. It was a text message from Susie. Trying to call you. Leave tomorrow. I pressed call. Nothing. I tried to send a text. Nothing. But what did it matter? Suddenly I felt relief and calm. They had been delayed. That was all. Tomorrow they would be here. I sat down again with the nativity. Perhaps the missing figures were inside. I put in my hand. My fingers closed around a metal object. It was a small iron key with a hoop top. Maybe it was the key to the attic door. Outside, snow had fallen, snow on snow. The sky had cleared. The moon sped above the sea. I had gone to bed, and I was deep asleep when I heard it clearly. Above me, footsteps, pacing, down the room, hesitate, turn, return. I lay in bed, eyes staring blindly at the blind ceiling. Why do we open our eyes when we can't see anything? And what was there to see? I don't believe in ghosts. I wanted to put on the light, but what if the light didn't come on? Why would it be worse to be in darkness I had not chosen than darkness I was choosing? But it would be worse. I sat up in bed and pulled back the curtain a little. The moon had been so bright tonight. Surely there would be light. There was light. Outside the house, hand in hand, stood the still and silent figures of a mother and child. I did not sleep again till daylight, and when I slept and woke again, it was almost midday, and already the light was lowering. Hurrying to get coffee, I saw that the dress was gone. I had left it dripping over the sink, and it was gone. Get out of the house! I set off for the station. There was an air frost that had coated the trees in glittering white. It was beautiful and deathly. The world held in ice. On the roads there were no car tracks, no noise but the roar and drop of the sea. I moved slowly and saw no one. In the white, unmoving landscape, I wondered if there was anyone else left alive. At the station, I waited. I waited some time, past the time, until the train whistled on the track. The train stopped. The guard got down and saw me. He shook his head. "There's no one," he said. "No one at all." I thought I would cry. I took out my mute phone. I flashed up the message, "Trying to call you. Leave tomorrow." The guard looked at it. "Happens it's you who should be leaving," he said. "There's no more trains past Carlisle now till the 27th. Tomorrow was the last, and that's been canceled. Weather." I wrote down a number and gave it to the guard. "Will you phone my friends and tell them that I'm on my way home?" On the slow journey back to High Fallen House, I filled my mind with departure. It would be slow and dangerous to travel at night, but I could not consider another night alone, or not alone. All I had to do was manage 40 miles to Ink Barn. There was a pub and a guest house and a remote but normal life. The text message kept playing in my head. Had it really meant that I should leave? And why? Because Susie and Stephen couldn't come? Weather? Illness? It's all a guessing game. The fact is, I have to go. The house seemed subdued when I returned. I had left the lights on, and I went upstairs straight to pack my bag. At once I saw the light to the attic was on. I paused, breathed. Of course it's on. I never switched it off. That proves its wiring fault. I must tell the housekeeper. My bag packed, I threw the food into a box and put everything back in the car. I had the whiskey in the front, a blanket I stole from the bed, and I made a hot water bottle, just in case. It was only 5 o'clock. At worst, I'd be in Ink Barn by 9 p.m. I got in the car and turned the key. The radio came on for a second, died, and as the ignition clicked and clicked, I knew that the battery was flat. 2 hours ago at the station, the car had started first time, even if I had left the lights on, but I hadn't left the lights on. A cold panic hit me. I took a swig of the whiskey. I couldn't sleep in the car all night. I would die. I don't want to die. Back in the house, I wondered what I was going to do all night. I must not fall asleep. I had noticed some old books and volumes when I had explored downstairs yesterday, assorted dusty adventure stories and tales of empire. As I sorted through them, I came across a faded velvet photograph album. In the cold, deserted sitting room, I began to discover the past. High Fallen House, 1910. The women in long skirts with miraculous waists. The men in shooting tweeds. The stable boys in waistcoats. The gardening boys wearing flat caps. The maids in starched aprons. And here they are again in their Sunday best. A wedding photograph. Joseph and Mary Locke, 1912. He was a gardener, she was a maid. In the back of the album, loose and unsorted, were further photographs and newspaper cuttings. 1914, the men in uniform. There was Joseph. I took the album back into the kitchen and put it next to the wooden soldier. I had on my coat and scarf. I propped myself up on 2 chairs by the wood-fired range and dozed and waited and waited and dozed. It was perhaps 2 o'clock when I heard a child crying. Not a child who had scraped his knee or lost a toy, but an abandoned child. A child whose own voice is his last hold on life. A child who cries and knows that no one will come. The sound was not above me. It was above me. I knew where it was coming from. I put my hands over my ears and my head between my knees. I could not shut out the sound. A locked-up child, a hungry child, a child who was cold and wet and frightened. Twice I got up and went to the door. Twice I sat down again. The crying stopped. Silence. A dreadful silence. I raised my head. Footsteps were coming down the stairs. Not one foot in front of the other, but one foot dragging slightly, then the other joining it, steadying, stepping again. At the bottom of the stairs, the footsteps paused. Then they did what I knew they would do with all the terror in my body. The footsteps came towards the kitchen door. Whatever was out there was standing 12 feet away on the other side of the door. I stood behind the table and picked up a knife. The door swung open with violent force that rammed the brass doorknob into the plaster of the wall. Wind and snow blew into the kitchen, whirling up the photographs and cuttings on the table. I saw the front door itself was wide open, the entrance hall like a wind tunnel. Holding the knife, I went forward into the hall to shut the door. The pendant mantel lantern that hung from the ceiling was swinging wildly on its long chain. A sudden gust lurched it forward like a child's swing pushed too high. It fell back at force against the large semicircular fanlight over the front doors. The fanlight shattered and fell around my shoulders in shards of sharp rain. Flicker, buzz, darkness. The house lights were out. No wind now, no cries. Silence again. Glass hit in the snow-lit hall. I walked out of the front door and into the night. At the drive, I turned left and I saw them, the mother and child. The child was wearing the woolen dress. She had no shoes. She held up her arms piteously to her mother, who stood like stone. I ran forward. I grabbed the child in my arms. There was no child. I had fallen face down in the snow. Help me! That's not my voice. I'm on my feet again. The mother is ahead of me. I follow her. She's going toward the walled garden. She seems to pass through the door, leaving me on the other side. Do not enter. I tried the rusty hoop handle. It broke off, taking a piece of door with it. I kicked the door open. It fell off its hinges. The ruined and abandoned garden lay before me. A walled garden of 1 acre used to feed 20 people, but that was a long time ago. There were footprints in the snow. I followed them. They led me to the bothy, its roof patched with corrugated iron. There was no door, but the inside seemed dry and sound. There was a tear-off calendar still on the wall, 22 December, 1916. I put my hand in my pocket and I realized that the key from the nativity was there. At the same time, I heard a chair scrape on the floor in the room beyond. I had no fear anymore. As the body first shivers and then numbs with cold, my feelings were frozen. I was moving through shadows as one who dreams. In the room beyond there was a low fire lit in a tiny fireplace. On either side of the fire sat the mother and child. The child was absorbed, playing with a marble. Her bare feet were blue, but she did not seem to feel the cold any more than I did. Are we dead then? The woman with the shawl over her head looked at me with deep, expressionless eyes. I recognized her. It was Mary Locke. She nodded at me. Or at not me, at the same other me in some other time, I don't know. Her gaze went to a tall cupboard. I knew that my key fitted this cupboard and I must open it. I did so. A dusty uniform fell out, crumpling like a puppet. The uniform was not quite empty of its occupant. The back of the faded wool jacket had a long slash where the lungs would have been. I looked at the knife in my hand. Open the door! Are you in there? Open the door! I woke to blinding white. Where am I? Something's rocking. It's the car. I'm in my car. A heavy glove was brushing off the snow. I sat up, found my keys, pressed the unlock button. It was morning. Outside was the guard from the train and a woman who announced herself as Mrs. Wormwood. Fine mess you've made here, she said. We went into the kitchen. I was shivering so much that Mrs. Wormwood relented and began to make coffee. Alfie fetched me, she said, after he spoke to your friends. There's a body, I said, in the walled garden. Is that where it is? Said Mrs. Wormwood. At Christmas, 1914, Joseph Locke had gone to war. Before he left for Flanders, he had made a nativity scene for his little girl. When he came back in 1916, he had been gassed. They heard him climbing the stairs, gasping for breath through froth-corrupted lungs. His mind had gone, they said. At night in the attic where he slept with his wife and child, he leaned vacantly against the wall, rolling the child's marbles up and down and up, pacing, pacing, pacing. One night, just before Christmas, he strangled his wife and daughter. He left them for dead in the bed and went out. But his wife was not dead. She followed him. In the morning they found her sitting by the nativity, her dress dark with blood, her finger marks livid at her throat. She was singing a lullaby and pushing the point of the knife into the back of the wooden figure. Joseph was never found. Are you going to call the police? I said. What for? Said Mrs. Wormwood. Let the dead bury the dead. Alfie the guard went out to see to my car. It started first time. The exhaust blew in the wide air. I left them cleaning up and was about to set off when I remembered I had left my radio in the kitchen. I went back inside. The kitchen was empty. I could hear the two of them up in the attic. I picked up the radio. The nativity was on the table as I had left it. But it wasn't as I had left it. Joseph was there, and the animals and the shepherds and the worn-out star, and in the center was the crib. Next to the crib were the wooden figures of a mother and child. The end. Well, at least that one had a happier ending, right? But what do you guys think? Is this a tradition that you guys would like to bring back? It's something I would like to bring back. I would love to bring back the Christmas ghost story tradition and tell ghost stories every year on Christmas, which on this show you can guarantee that is something we are going to do every year. But what do you guys think? Everybody enjoys a good ghost story, right? Whether it's in the middle of Halloween, or in the middle of summer sitting around a campfire, or in the middle of winter sitting around a fireplace. Everybody enjoys a good ghost story. That is just common sense. But what do you guys think? Is this a tradition that we should bring back every year, the ghost stories of Christmas? Or is this a tradition that's better left dead by the wayside? In the end, ladies and gentlemen, you be the judge. We got to close it out. That's right, that's it for this episode of the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Thursday, December 10th, 2020. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, the den may be closing for the weekend, but don't you worry. The weekend fun has only just begun. That's right, the animals of radio know how to party right. Make sure you come back Friday through Sunday and join our buddy AJ the Ripon Rabbit for the Ripon Rabbit Hole live show. That's right. This Friday, I happen to know he's going to be talking about mysterious booms. That's right, all around the world there's been mystery booms and weird metallic sounds coming from the sky that has no explanation. Did you just hear that boom? I think that was my mind being blown. Make sure you tune in Friday night to check it out. Then on Saturday, he's going to be joined by special guest Laurel Erica. She is an American English linguist who has studied words and word magic for many, many years. She'll be here to discuss the secret spells of the English language. That's right. Then on Sunday, ley lines. Ley lines refer to straight alignments drawn between various historic structures and prominent landmarks. Do they carry along with them rivers of supernatural energy? Maybe perhaps like the St. Michael's line that runs right through the middle of the UK. It turns out that there's a lot of churches with the same name on this particular line, and that's only one of many surrounding the grid. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to hear more about that, make sure you tune in Sunday as AJ the Ripon Rabbit and the Ripon Rabbit Hole live show rounds out the weekend here on the RiponRabbitHole.com and Ripon Common Sense Radio. Speaking of RiponRabbitHole.com, make sure you hop your way over there and sign up for our weekly newsletter. We only send out one a week. We don't spam when we don't sell your email. That's right. You'll get one email from us a week with our entire schedule in the email. So we do definitely encourage you to go over there and sign up for that so you'll know what we're talking about every week, and you can send this out to your friends and family if it's something that you know that they would be interested in. Also, while you're over there, make sure you check out our groups, or our rabbit holes as we like to call them. We have everything from lucid dreaming to the Mandela effect and the Dark Wolf's Den Show group, as well as the Ripon Rabbit Hole, and many, many, many more, I assure you. While you're over there also, if you want to hang out with me, do make sure that you come by the 24/7 Backstage Lounge. That's where I'm going to be right after the show. All you got to do is click the 24/7 Backstage Lounge, scroll halfway down that page, click the VIP entrance. You'll have to okay your cam and microphone, but you can turn that off the moment that you get inside and just use text chat. We would love to see you over there hanging out with us. Also, ladies and gentlemen, down at the bottom of every page is a great big red record button. I usually ask you guys to hit this for me, but I'm going to ask you to hit this for AJ this time. Ladies and gentlemen, AJ the Ripon Rabbit wants to know, what is your Christmas wish? Send your Christmas wishes in with the red button and he'll play it on his show. And at the end of the month, he's going to play all of them back to back like we did the Never Nothing November. So go over there, hit that red button, let him know what your Christmas wish is. I'm not going to reveal mine just yet. I'm going to go ahead and hit the red button myself and make my own recording to put on the show. So, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you do that. We would love to know what your Christmas wish is. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I have to get out of here for this week. It has been an absolute honor and pleasure to entertain you guys once again. On behalf of Chick Mandela Effect, Michael Musco, Walt House, AJ the Ripon Rabbit, and everyone at Ripon Common Sense Radio, we thank you for being here, and remember, until next week, ladies and gentlemen, stay awake, but dare to dream. Happy holidays, everyone. How? Yeah. Good night.
Unlocked and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner, is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner, is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark